It's been almost a full year since I tested Arby's and found this in their water. And since then, one of their reps reached out to me and said that they would investigate. So let's go see if they've improved, and while we're at it, let's go test all the Arby's locations. Starting in Payson, which may sound familiar thanks to Kevin Bacon, I took some samples from the soda machine and the bathroom tap water and brought them to my lab. Now, I understand that you may not have the full microbiology background to understand if what you're about to see is good or bad. So to help you understand, I came up with my own scoring system. If the Arby's has 0 coliforms in their water, they get a check, because remember, having coliforms in the water essentially means you're drinking poopy water. If there are no commonly known pathogens in the water, the location will get another check mark. And finally, if there's less than 500 colony-forming units in the water, they'll get another check mark. And if a location gets all 3 check marks, when it comes to microbiology, that's pretty good.
That's what I call high-quality H2O.
Now that I've put the liquid on petri dishes, let's go ahead and let it incubate and check out the results. Based off this time lapse, we can immediately tell that this location has a lot of bacteria in its water. But just because there's bacteria doesn't necessarily mean that this is bad. We would need to do further testing to identify that, and actually sent out some of this liquid to be tested via next generation sequencing, and here are the results. In this liquid, there were 3 bacteria that were identified: Pseudomonas orientalis, Pseudarcicilla hirudinus, and Pseudomonas fluorescens. The easiest way to quickly identify a pathogen is to simply look up the wiki page of your bacteria. If it doesn't exist, or if it's very short, it's very likely not a pathogen. This same rule applies to coliforms as well. Of these 3 bacteria, Pseudomonas fluorescens is by far the most interesting. It has been heavily studied in areas like biotechnology, plant and soil science, and how it acts as a human pathogen. Now, while it technically is a pathogen, it's very rare to get infected with this bacteria, so I won't be counting this against this Arby's location. Now let's head back to the lab because I want to show you a couple more things. First off, I have a media control, which indicates that the media that I used was sterile. And next, I have an air plate, which indicates that the environment that I was testing in was also sterile. These controls demonstrate that the tester did not introduce any contamination. Additionally, we also have the tap water from the bathroom. This also acts as a control to demonstrate what the city water looks like. And as you can see, there's very little growth, which is very common when it comes to the United States tap water system. Next, we have the ice. And all I have to say is, yikes. It appears that the ice machine is not being properly cleaned. And while I didn't identify the ice bacteria, it's likely that they are the same as what's found in the water. And finally, let's look at the dilutions of the water. As you recall from the time lapse, this is what grew over about a week. And when counting colonies, the general rule is you can only count up to about 250 colonies before you need to move on to the next dilution. And even when we look at the next dilution, there's still too much to count, which means that there's more than 2,500 CFU per milliliter of water, which is over 5 times the amount of colonies that we'd like to see in this water. So we're going to go ahead and give this location 2 check marks out of 3. Now, before we move on to the next location, if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Additionally, leave a comment on where I should test next, and the most liked comment will be one of my next videos. Now let's move on to the next location, which is Spanish Fork. After taking samples from the soda machine and the bathroom, I once again brought these samples to my lab for testing. Now, the testing process will be the exact same for every location, and in order to not bore you, I'll teach you something new each time. For those wondering, this is the air plate that I was talking about earlier. It's a petri dish that is left exposed to the air while any testing is being performed. If any microbes are in the air, they'll show up during incubation. This is how I know if my testing environment is sterile or not. Typically, if there's any growth on these, I'll go back and I'll retest those samples. All right, let's go see what's growing in Spanish Fork, Utah. Once again, we see a considerable amount of bacteria growing in this time lapse. However, you may notice that there is less growth than the Arby's and Payson. So let's go look at some more results that we got from this location. Now, because I tested multiple locations together, the media control and air plate only need to be tested once, and those were clean. So I'm going to show you the Spanish Fork tap water, which, as you can see, was completely clean. Next up is the ice machine, which had very little growth and is the exact results you want to see when testing water and ice, which indicates that this location is actually cleaning their ice machine pretty well. So nice work to whoever is cleaning up the ice machines at this location. However, the fountain machine needs some work. As you can see, there's too many colonies to count at this dilution, so we'll need to go to the next dilution. Thankfully, the next dilution is countable. If you pause this video and count up each circle, there's about 100 colonies, which means that this water has about 1,000 colony forming units per milliliter of water. Unfortunately, that's almost double what you'd like to see in water. And when we look at the next generation sequencing results, we have some familiar names. You may have guessed by now, but you'll be seeing Pseudomonas a lot. This is a type of bacteria that grows really well in water environments. Regardless, if you look up these bacteria, none of them are concerning to the average healthy adult. So this location also gets 2 check marks. Now, I want to be very clear. This video does not mean I don't like Arby's. In fact, I love the curly fries with the spicy 3-pepper sauce. And I probably spent over $100 in buying Arby's food while making this video. That being said, this next location does illustrate something somewhat bad about Arby's. This is the Springville's Arby's, which was the location I tested almost a year ago that had a lot of growth. I took samples from both the fountain machine and the bathroom tap water to my lab, and I'm hoping to see some improvement, but let's go see what's growing. This time around, instead of just testing the ice and water, I decided I wanted to see if the soda would be affected as well. My theory was that the high sugar content of soda would eliminate the bacteria. And if you're wondering what type of soda this is, I decided to go with Coca-Cola. Let's go see what might grow. Once again, we have an Arby's with lots of bacteria in the water, which indicates they haven't perfected their method of cleaning. However, when we look at the rest of the results, there are some good highlights. Here's the tap water control indicating that the city water is clean. And here's the ice machine results, which indicates that whoever's cleaning their ice machine is doing a decent job. Here's the time-lapse plate, which at this dilution has too many colonies for me to count. And here's the next dilution, which is countable. And if you pause the video, you should count about 200 colonies, which at this dilution means we have approximately 2,000 colony forming units per milliliter, which is an improvement from the last time I tested when they had over 5,000 colony forming units. But even at 2,000, that's much more than what we'd like to see. And finally, do you think that the Coca-Cola would make a difference? Turns out, not really. Whether you drink the soda or the water, you're getting about the same amount of bacteria. But luckily, when we look at the next generation sequencing results, none of these bacteria are harmful to the average healthy adult. And unsurprisingly, there's Pseudomonas again. And overall, this location also gets 2 check marks. Now, this next location was very memorable because usually it takes about 5 minutes to get there from the Springville Arby's. However, on this day, there was awful traffic and it took 30 minutes. I hate traffic. But in the name of science, I finally made it to the Provo Arby's. And I was hungry again, so I decided to grab some more food and then grab some more test samples and headed back to my lab. If you're wondering what a dilution is, let me take a second to explain this concept. A petri dish only has so much space on it for bacteria growth. So when too much bacteria grows, it's hard to distinguish where one bacteria colony begins and the next one ends. So just in case, a microbiologist can choose to do extra dilutions to dilute the total amount of bacteria, which makes it easier to count. This dilution is simply done by taking 1 milliliter of the original water and placed in 9 milliliters of a sterile liquid. In this case, I'm using tryptic soy broth. This gives me a 1 to 10 dilution. By doing this, I can get a better count of the colonies, but you also need to remember to multiply your final count by 10, 100, or 1000 depending on what dilution you end up using. Alright, now let's go throw these in the incubator and see what might grow. So while this water still has lots of bacteria in it, this is the first time so far that we can actually count from this dilution. And if you pause this video, there's about 100 colonies, which is within the amount that we'd like to see. Now let's go take a look at the rest of the results. Once again, here's the city's tap water, perfectly clean. And the ice machine also had very little growth as well. So overall, whoever's doing the cleaning at this location is doing a pretty good job. And now let's go see what type of bacteria is growing in the water. Now, I am surprised to see only one identified bacteria because it looked like there were multiple color morphologies. However, it is not uncommon for the same bacteria to have different colored colonies on a petri dish. Regardless, here's a fun fact. If you recall from my other videos, this is the same bacteria that I've found in raw milk. But overall, we're gonna go ahead and give this location 3 check marks. Now, the next location holds a special place in my heart because over 10 years ago, it became the only fast food restaurant to make me throw up. And of course, I'm gonna celebrate that with some more food. And while I'm at it, grab some more water samples. Now, I've seen some comments from those that have watched my videos saying that they're not going to wait the amount of time of my time lapse before they eat food or drink water, thinking that the bacteria is only there after so many days and that they are safe. However, this is a misunderstanding because the bacteria is already there. It just takes that amount of time for the bacteria to duplicate to the point that I can finally count each colony. Furthermore, by the time we can see a colony means that there are now millions, if not billions of bacteria in that one colony. So what I'm trying to say is that the bacteria is already there from the beginning, but it just takes that amount of time for me to get an estimate count. Alright, let's throw these in the incubator and see what might grow. So as you can see, this location has the most growth on a petri dish that we've seen yet. But it gets more interesting. Let's go check out the other results. First, the tap water had a bunch of growth, and this is not normal. So I did some investigating, and I don't think this is from the water, but rather from their sink. If you look closely, there's a lot of gunk right here. And unfortunately, the only way to know for sure that the bacteria is from the water is I would need to bring a disinfectant and soak that head in the disinfectant and then retest the water. I didn't end up doing that for this video, but in the future I'll have to keep that in mind. But also keep in mind that the Provo South location had no growth in their tap water. Next is the ice. And as you can see, the ice machine needs to be better cleaned. And in fact, if you look closely enough, the white colonies are actually fungus. So now we know for sure that we've got both bacteria and fungus in the ice. And finally, here's the water with no dilution from the time lapse. And here's the other petri dish at a 1 to 10 dilution. And because there's too much growth on this plate, that means that there's over 2,500 CFU per milliliter. Now let's go take a look at the next generation sequencing results, which as you can see, there's a long list of mostly harmless bacteria with the exception of one. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is a very well-known pathogen that infects humans and is best known for causing the infected area to turn green and have a very unique smell. And this is why we're going to give this location 1 check mark only. Now that was kind of a downer, so this next location is in Orem, and let's go see if they do any better. After grabbing the samples and bringing them to my lab, I put them on petri dishes, and now let's go see what might grow. So this is the first time you get to see what's called a spreader colony, which basically means a bacteria colony is taking up about 25% of the total petri dish. When this happens, I typically go to the next dilution to get my bacteria estimate, so let's go take a look at the other results. The next 5 locations were tested on a different day, so I had to perform another air and media control, which both of those came out clean. The air control did have a crack in it because I left it in the incubator too long. But what's important is that they came out clean. Alright, let's check out the other results. Once again, here's the petri dish from the time lapse. And remember, we've got this spreader colony here, so we're going to look at the next dilution to get a better estimate. And the next dilution does give us a better estimate, and if you pause this video, you'll see about 20 colonies, which means that there's only 200 colony forming units per milliliter. That's not too bad. However, it does get much worse when we get to the ice. Oof. Yeah, so what this means is opposite the other locations, that they actually are cleaning out their fountain machine pretty well, but they're not cleaning their ice machine very well at all. But I do love how orange these colonies look. Now you may have noticed that I didn't show you the tap water yet because I noticed something interesting. The orange colonies also showed up on the tap water as well, which makes me wonder, because these orange colonies showed up on all the plates, is this contamination from the city water? Possibly, but let's go look at the next generation sequencing to see what kind of bacteria this might be. If you do some research on these bacteria, you'll determine that none of these are a human pathogen. However, this agrobacterium is a plant pathogen which causes tumors in plants. So don't water your plants with this water. Overall, I'm going to give this location 3 check marks, but make sure you avoid the ice. Next up, we have the other Orem location, so let's go check out those results. And after putting the water on petri dishes, I once again put them in the incubator, and let's go see what might grow. As you can see, there's not that much growth, but once again we have a spreader colony, so I'm going to look at the next dilution to confirm my estimate. What's interesting is that this Orem location has no growth in their tap water, but they do have something in common when it comes to ice. It turns out that both locations could do a better job at cleaning out their ice machines. But as for the water, things look much better. As a reminder, here's the time-lapse petri dish with the spreader colony, and then here is the next dilution. And if you pause this video, you'll notice that there's about 6 colonies, which means there's an estimated amount of 60 colony forming units per milliliter, which is a pretty good number to what we've seen so far. But now let's go look at the next generation sequencing results and hope that the good news continues. Which, if you pause and look up these bacteria, you'll determine that none of them are pathogenic. But if you dig deeper, you'll also notice that one of them looks familiar. And you may have guessed it, but this is a bacteria that was discovered near the city of Tatooine, Tunisia, which is the same city that inspired the name of the popular Star Wars planet. And overall, we're going to give this location 3 check marks as well. The next location was in Lindon, Utah, and this time I grabbed a treat and then some samples and headed back to my lab. In case that you're curious on seeing the whole testing process unedited, I'm going to go ahead and leave that here. If you just want to see the results, skip to this time. Alright, that's the full process. Let's go see what might grow. Once again, we see that there's a lot of growth, but in this case, we're able to count how many colonies there are. If you pause this video, there's about 200 colonies. Also, something cool that I observed is that some of these colonies actually stop growing after so many days. When we go and look at the other results, you'll notice that the tap water has a giant spreader colony on it. It looks like I'll have to do a disinfectant at this location as well. As for the ice, it looks like there's some room for improvement. However, is it just me, or does that colony kind of look like a heart? Or maybe it's just Valentine's is coming up and I've got that on my mind. Overall, this location gets 3 check marks. Now, when I went to this next location, their ice machine was actually broken. So rather than testing the lobby machine, I got a cup of ice from the drive-through ice machine. And rather than being annoyed about not having lobby ice, I decided to get an Arby's Euro, which was pretty good. Until I almost broke my tooth on this piece of bone found in my Euro. Oh well, I ended up taking the liquids back to my lab and put them on a petri dish. And hopefully something good will come out of this. Alright, let's incubate these petri dishes and see what might grow. And this is pretty impressive because barely anything grew. In fact, this is the best water we've seen in this video. And on top of that, the bacteria that did grow have some really cool colors. Unfortunately, we also found some growth in the top water, which means we probably need to disinfect the faucet head of this location as well. But the good news is when we look at the ice, it had very little growth as well. There were a total of 3 colonies, and this long colony right here just means that I over incubated the plate. Because as the petri dish begins to dry out, for whatever reason the bacteria likes to grow around the edges. And even as we look at the next generation sequencing results, we still get good news. Only 1 bacteria was identified, and that bacteria is not pathogenic. So overall, we're going to give this location 3 check marks. The next location was in a city called Highland. And after repeating the same testing process, let's go ahead and incubate these petri dishes and see what might grow. In this time lapse, we get to see a petri dish full of growth. This either means we have multiple spreader colonies or that the water has a lot of bacteria in it. Regardless, a second dilution is necessary to give a proper estimate. But first, let's look at the tap water. As you can see, we have yet another location that probably has something growing on the outside of the faucet head. I say that with confidence here because city water does not look like this. And as a reminder, here's what the time-lapse petri dish looked like. But remember, we need a better estimate, so we need to go to the next dilution, which if you pause on this dilution, you'll notice that there's about 100 colonies, which when you multiply that by 10 gives us an estimate of 1,000 colony forming units per milliliter of water. Unfortunately, that's not the number we wanted to see, and it gets worse when we look at the ice. It appears that the ice machine is in some need of better cleaning as well. And hopefully there's some good news that comes from the next generation sequencing results. And while we do see some new names here, none of these are pathogenic, and that's why we're going to give this location 2 check marks out of 3. Now these next 3 locations were tested on another day, and because of that I need to perform another media and air control, which when we get to the lab, as you can see, the media control was completely clean, and the air control was also clean. As a reminder, this is just a way to confirm that contamination is not occurring. Additionally, I detected no growth in the tap water as well. So now, after incubating all these plates, let's go see what was growing at Saratoga Springs. Thankfully, we don't see very much growth here. If you pause this video, you'll notice that there's about 25 colonies, which is pretty good and the type of result that you want to see. But now let's go look at the other results to see what we find. When it came to the ice, I had an interesting experience. The petri dish agar had melted. And this happened because I mistakenly put it against something that was hot in the incubator. And because of this, I wasn't able to get any good estimates. So I decided to go back to this location and get another ice sample, which those results show that there's still a little bit of bacteria in their ice machine. And while this isn't great news, the colonies were actually pretty cool looking. Alright, let's go check out the next generation sequencing results. Which these results were extremely fascinating because we have 6 new bacteria here. However, if you look them all up, each of them are not pathogenic. And that's why this location is going to earn 3 check marks. The next location is in Eagle Mountain. And here are the results. The tap water at this location was perfectly clean. Now let's go check out the time lapse. The time lapse appears to have a lot of growth, but if you pause this video, you'll be able to count about 150 colonies, which is an acceptable value. And when we look at the ice, we have a similar amount of colonies with the same morphology, which makes me wonder if the bacteria is the same in both the ice and water. Let's go check out the next generation results to see what it could be. So it's likely that those colonies are Pseudomonas, but regardless, none of these are pathogenic, and that's why we're going to give this location 3 check marks. Now, while this appears to be the last location, there's actually one more. It recently closed down, and that's why it doesn't show up on the map, but I was able to grab some samples before its closure. So once again, here's the tap water, perfectly clean, and now let's go check out the time lapse. Unfortunately, there's a lot of growth here and a spreader colony, so we're going to have to go to the next dilution to get a better estimate. However, when I looked at the next dilution, I saw something that did not look good. Now obviously you can see that there's still a lot of growth, and if you pause this video, there's about 100 colonies. But do you also notice how there's a green shimmer to this petri dish? That's an indication that we may have a pathogenic Pseudomonas in this water. So that's potentially bad news, but the good news is that their ice machine was actually pretty clean. So now let's go check out the next generation sequencing results to see what that bacteria is. And luckily it was Pseudomonas, but it was non-pathogenic. So we're going to go ahead and give this closed down location 2 check marks out of 3. Now that I finished my investigation, here's 2 things that I want to make sure that you understand. First, it does appear that Arby's did better since my last video, but there's definitely room for improvement. So Arby's, hopefully you take this video and make those improvements. And second, the whole point of this channel is to show you that bacteria, it's all around us. And we literally found bacteria at every single Arby's location. And if you like this video, don't forget to follow so that you can see what might grow in the next investigation.